In the old woman's diary, right next to Mark's name, was a note, "Doormat. Falls for tears. Perfect victim." Mark stared at the peeling paint on the door of apartment 3B, his hand hovering inches from the wood, trembling slightly. It had been exactly 3 weeks since he and Sarah had moved into the building in Columbus, eager to start their life together as an engaged couple. The complex was old, smelling faintly of boiled cabbage and floor wax, but the rent was cheap enough to allow them to save for a house. Or at least that had been the plan before they met Diane. Diane was the kind of neighbor who seemed to have stepped out of a tragic novel. She was a tiny, bird-like woman who drowned in oversized cardigans even in the humid heat of late August. Her hair was a faded auburn that showed inches of gray roots, and her voice was a wet, raspy wheeze that suggested decades of unfiltered cigarettes and sorrow. The first time Mark had met her, she was struggling to carry a bag of groceries up the stairs. Being raised in a household where helping elders was not a choice but a commandment, Mark had immediately taken the bag. It was surprisingly light, just a loaf of bread and a tin of cat food. "Bless you, young man," she had whispered, clutching his forearm with a grip that felt like dry twigs. "My son. He used to help me like this, before the accident." That was the first hook. By the second week, Mark knew the whole story. The dead son, the estranged daughter in California who did not have time for a useless old mother, and the arthritis that made opening jars impossible. Sarah, pragmatic and sharp-witted, had been wary from the start. She pointed out that Diana's tragic monologues always occurred right when Mark came home from work, never when Sarah did. But Mark saw only a lonely woman surrounded by porcelain angels and photos of people who had left her behind. The real test came on a Tuesday evening. Mark was exhausted, his tie loosened, dreaming of a cold beer. Diane was waiting in her doorway. The door cracked open just enough to release the scent of stale lavender and kitty litter. She was weeping. Not loud sobs, but a silent, shaking grief that looked terrifyingly genuine. "Mark," she choked out. I do not know who else to ask." He stopped. Sarah was already inside their apartment. He could hear the TV. If he walked past, he would be safe. He could just say he did not hear her. But the image of his own grandmother, alone and confused, flashed in his mind. He turned toward Diana's door. "What's wrong, Diane?" "It's the power company," she said, holding out a crumpled notice with trembling hands. "They made a mistake. They say I owe $200 or they'll cut it off tonight. I have the money coming next week from Social Security, but tonight, my insulin is in the fridge, Mark. If the power goes..." She trailed off, wiping her eyes with a tissue that was already shredded from use. "I see not ask you. It's not right. I'll try to pack the insulin in ice." Mark looked at the notice. It looked official. He looked at Diane, who seemed to shrink under the hallway light. $200 was their grocery budget for 2 weeks. But the insulin. If something happened to her because he walked away, could he live with that? "Wait here," Mark said, his voice thick with a mixture of nobility and dread. When he went inside, Sarah was chopping vegetables. He did not tell her the truth. He told her he needed cash for a parking ticket he'd forgotten about. The lie tasted like ash in his mouth. He grabbed the emergency cash from the tin in the kitchen cabinet and went back into the hallway. Diane did not smile when he handed her the money. She cried harder, grabbing his hands and kissing his knuckles, her tears wet and hot against his skin. "You're an angel," she sobbed. "A literal angel. I'll pay you back the second my check arrives. I promise on my son's grave." Mark felt a surge of warmth, the specific dopamine hit of being a savior. He went back to his apartment, feeling like he had done the hard, righteous thing. He did not know yet that he had not just given away $200. He had paid the admission fee to his own destruction. The descent was not a slide. It was an avalanche. 3 days after the electric bill incident, Diane knocked on their door at 6:00 a.m. Her cat, Mr. Whiskers, a mangy orange tabby that hissed at everyone but Diane, was allegedly vomiting blood. She needed a ride to the emergency vet. Mark, bleary-eyed and panicked, drove her. The vet required an upfront deposit of $300. Diane had forgotten her wallet. She stood in the lobby of the veterinary clinic, clutching her purse to her chest, looking so small and terrified that the receptionist began to glare at Mark as if he were the villain. He paid it with his credit card. "I'll add it to the tab, Marky," she whispered in the car ride home. "My pension comes on the 1st. You'll have a lump sum. Maybe you and Sarah can take a trip." But the 1st of the month came and went. When Mark gently brought it up, Diane dissolved into hysterics. There had been a processing error at the bank. Her identity had been stolen. The bank manager was conspiring against her because she was old. The stories were elaborate, filled with specific names and dates that made them seem plausible. By the 2nd month, the dynamic had shifted. It was no longer about charity. It was about investment. Mark had given her nearly $1,200. If he stopped helping her now, she would starve or get evicted. And he would never see his money back. He had to keep her afloat until the mythical settlement check or insurance payout arrived. Sarah found out on a rainy Thursday. She had tried to use the emergency cash for a car repair and found the tin empty. She confronted Mark, and the confession poured out of him like infected pus. "You gave her how much?" Sarah screamed. Her face flushed with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "Mark, look at her shoes. She wears new Nikes. I saw a delivery guy drop off a flat-screen TV box at her place last week. That was for her nephew." Mark defended, though his stomach churned. "She's just holding it for him. Sarah, she has nobody. Her brother just died in Portland. She's grieving. She's a leech, Mark, and you letting her bleed us dry. We do not have this kind of money. I see not just abandon her." Mark shouted back, the manipulation having rewired his brain to protect his abuser. "She needs me. If I stop now, everything was for nothing. She'll pay me back." "She will never pay you back," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a cold, final tone. "If you give her one more cent, Mark, I am gone. I mean it. I would not build a future with someone who not prioritize us." Mark promised. He swore he was done. 2 days later, Diane waited for him by the mailboxes. She did not look sad this time. She looked frantic. She grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his flesh. "It's the landlord," she hissed, her eyes darting around as if they were being watched. "He says if I do not pay the back rent by 5 o'clock, he's putting my things on the curb. Mark, he's gonna take Mr. Whiskers to the pound. They'll kill him." "Diane, I see not," Mark said, pulling his arm away. "Sarah, we rebroke. Just 400, she begged, dropping to her knees right there on the dirty linoleum of the lobby. A neighbor from 4C walked by, staring at the scene, a young man towering over a weeping old woman on her knees. The shame burned Mark's face like acid. "Please. I have the check in my hand. I just not cash it until Monday. I'll sign a promissory note. Anything. Do not let me die on the street, Mark." He looked at the neighbor's judging eyes. He looked at Diana's shaking shoulders. The pressure in his chest was unbearable, a physical weight that made it hard to breathe. He felt like a monster. He felt like the only person in the world who could stop a tragedy. He went to the ATM around the corner. He withdrew the rent money he and Sarah had set aside. When he handed the cash to Diane, she did not cry. She snatched it with a speed that startled him, her eyes instantly drying. "You a good boy," she said. When Mark got home, the apartment was empty. Sarah's clothes were gone. A note on the counter read, "I hope she's worth it." Mark sank onto the floor, burying his face in his hands. He had lost the woman he loved for a neighbor he barely knew. He felt hollowed out, scraped clean of dignity. But at least, he told himself, at least Diane was safe. At least he was a good person. The apartment felt too big without Sarah. The silence was heavy, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional sound of traffic outside. It was a Saturday, 3 weeks after Sarah had left. Mark was sitting at his kitchen table, staring at a disconnection notice for his own internet service. He had eaten nothing but instant noodles for a week. He needed to talk to Diane. It had been days since he'd seen her. Every time he knocked, the lights were off or she did not answer. Panic began to gnaw at him. Had something happened? Was she in the hospital? He walked out into the hallway and pressed his ear against her door. Silence. He was about to knock when he heard a sound that froze his blood. It was laughter. Not a polite chuckle, and certainly not the wheezing gasp of a dying woman. It was a full-throated, belly-shaking laugh. It was the sound of someone vibrant, healthy, and incredibly amused. No, I am telling you, it was too easy. Diane's voice rang out, clear and strong. The rasp was gone. It was a performance she had dropped the moment the door closed. He actually got on his knees to apologize to me because he did not have the full amount. Can you believe it? Mark stopped breathing. He leaned closer, his forehead resting against the cold wood. Oh, the girlfriend left him, Diane continued, her tone dripping with mockery. Smart girl. She saw right through it. But him? God, Gerald, he is pathetic. I told him the cat needed kidney dialysis. Who believes a cat gets dialysis? He practically threw his credit card at me. She was talking to someone. Gerald? The quiet man from 3B who had tried to warn Mark months ago? No, she was on the phone. IV got enough for the cruise deposit now, she said. I am thinking the Mediterranean. I'll tell him I am going to a specialist clinic in Cleveland for my lungs. He'll probably offer to drive me to the airport. Mark felt the world tilt. The rage that hit him was not hot. It was ice cold. It started in his stomach and shot through his veins, numbing his extremities. Every tear, every tremble, every story about the dead son. It was all a script. She was not sick. She was not poor. She was a predator, and he was the carcass she had picked clean. He did not think. He pounded on the door. Diane, open the door. I hear you. The laughter cut off instantly. There was a scuffling sound, then silence. Open it, Mark screamed, kicking the bottom of the door. I know you in there. I want my money back. The door opened, but only as far as the chain allowed. Diane peered out. The cardigan was gone. She was wearing a silk blouse he had never seen before. Her face was hard, her eyes sharp and predatory. Keep your voice down, she hissed, the rasp back in place, though it slipped slightly. You disturbing the neighbors. I heard you. Mark shook, his hands balling into fists. I heard you laughing. I want my money. All of it. The vet bills, the rent, the electric. Everything. Diane stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a shark sensing blood in the water. Or what, Mark? She asked softly. You will call the police? And tell them what? That you gave a poor old woman gifts? There's no contract. There's no loan agreement. I'll tell them you scammed me. And I'll tell them you've been harassing me, Diane said, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. She reached up and unbuttoned the top of her blouse, revealing a patch of bruised skin on her collarbone. She pinched the skin hard, creating a fresh red mark right in front of his eyes. I'll tell them you forced your way in here. I'll tell them you demanded money for sexual favors. Who do you think they'll believe? The sweet, grieving mother with the dead son, or the angry young man whose fiancée just left him because he's unstable? Mark stepped back, horror washing over him. She had weaponized his own empathy. She had built a trap so perfect that struggling only tightened the noose. You insane, he whispered. I am comfortable, she corrected. Now go away, Mark, before I start screaming. She slammed the door. Mark stood in the hallway, the sound of the deadbolt sliding home echoing like a gunshot. He was ruined. He had no money, no Sarah, and now he had a loaded gun pointed at his reputation. He went back to his apartment and sat in the dark, waiting for the police to come for him. He was sure she would call them just for the sport of it. But the police did not come for Mark. They came 3 days later at dawn. Mark was awake, staring at the ceiling, when the street outside exploded with red and blue lights. He went to the window and saw not just a patrol car, but 3 cruisers, an ambulance, and a black van with no markings. He watched as men in tactical gear swarmed the front entrance of the building. He opened his apartment door just as they breached Diana's unit. There was no knocking this time. A battering ram shattered the lock, and the team poured in, weapons drawn. Police! Search warrant. Down on the ground. Neighbors began to peek out. The hallway filled with whispers. Mark stood frozen, watching the drama unfold. Minutes later, Diane was led out. She was not wearing the cardigan. She was in handcuffs, wearing the silk blouse, her hair wild. She was not crying. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. She scanned the hallway, her eyes locking on Mark for a split second. There was no fear in them, only annoyance, as if she had been inconvenienced by a rude waiter. As they dragged her away, a detective remained in the doorway, talking to a man in a hazmat suit. Mark stepped forward, his legs feeling like lead. "Officer," he asked, Is it because of the money she stole?" The detective looked at Mark, tired and grim. "Money? Son, if only it was just money. Are you a neighbor?" "Yes, I helped her. A lot." The detective sighed and gestured for Mark to look inside. Mark stepped to the threshold and gagged. The smell hit him first. Not cat litter, but something sweeter, darker. Rot. The apartment was a hoarding nightmare, stacks of newspapers and trash reaching the ceiling. But the bookshelf where the porcelain angels had stood, was cleared. Behind it, the wall had been stripped away to reveal rows of binders. Hundreds of them. "We've been tracking her for 5 years, the detective said, pulling on a pair of latex gloves. "Her name is not Diane. S. Margaret. And she does not have a dead son. She had a brother in Portland, though. He died last week. Arsenic poisoning. We found the same rat poison in her kitchen cabinet just now." Mark gripped the doorframe to keep from falling. "She killed him? She killed 3 husbands and a sister before him," the detective said. "Insurance policies. Pensions. She bleeds them dry, gets them to sign over power of attorney, and then finishes the job. She's got over $4 million in offshore accounts." The detective picked up a small, leather-bound notebook from a small table near the door. "She keeps records. Meticulously. Psychology profiles of everyone she meets, assessing their utility." He flipped the book open. "You Mark?" Mark nodded, unable to speak. The detective turned the book around. "You read the last entry." Mark looked at the page. His name was written in elegant, cursive script. Underneath, the ink was fresh. "Mark, Unit 3B. Assets. Liquidated. Value. $4,200 extracted. Weakness. Pathological need to be a hero. Status. Depleted. Next step. Accusation of assault to force eviction, then move to Unit 4 a target." And right next to his name, circled in red, was the note that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "Doormat. Falls for tears. Perfect victim." The hazmat team moved past him, carrying boxes of evidence. Mark walked back to his empty apartment. He packed his bags that night. He left the furniture. He left the keys on the counter. He did not leave a note. 6 months later, Mark was living in a studio apartment in a different city. He walked with his head down now. He did not make eye contact with neighbors. One evening, as he was unlocking his door, a young woman from down the hall approached him. She looked distressed, holding a phone with a cracked screen. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I am so sorry to bother you, but my battery died and I think I locked my keys inside. Could I possibly use your phone to call a locksmith?" Mark stopped. He looked at her. She was young, pretty, and looked genuinely scared. Her eyes were wide and watery. He felt the old instinct rise, the urge to help, to be the good guy, to save the damsel. Then he remembered the laughter through the wall. He remembered the diary. He remembered the empty space where Sarah used to be. Mark looked the woman dead in the eye. His face was a stone mask. "I do not have a phone," he lied, his voice flat and dead. He opened his door, stepped inside, and slid the deadbolt home, leaving her standing alone in the hallway. He did not check the peephole to see if she left. He did not care. The doormat was gone. Only the stone remained.